much for coming to our second volunteer update of the season. And we are so fortunate today to have our first mayor of Sanibel, Porter Goss, and our first city, one of our first city employees of Sanibel, Jean Woodring, here to tell us about the road to incorporation of the city. And once we're a city, now what do we do? And then the birth of the Sanibel Charter, birth of the Sanibel Plan. So without further ado, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce both of these people, and we will get started.
For the city for way long years. I retired actually in 1999, so that's been a while too. Still kicking.
And both Porter and Jean came to the islands in the early 70s, and the talk around town at the time was, well, maybe we ought to become a city. And what they're going to talk about is, okay, if we're going to become a city, what do I need to do? And these are the things that Porter was filling us in on the other day. Just how did you go about doing it? What really took place?
Thank you. A lot of nice people were here to welcome us and make us feel comfortable. We decided to stay, and then we started to think about what should this place look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Is this the community we want to live in? And when we started to ask that question, we discovered a lot of people had different thoughts and points of view than we did. And I think that really was a time when there was an awakening here, because the bridge had just been put in. More and more people were discovering the old Sanibel, and change was upon us. The question of what that change was going to look like and who was going to make the decision. But before we start, I want to say I'm very glad to see everybody here, because there's a critical message involved in the city of Sanibel, which Jean and I have talked about and share. And that is, it only takes 3 votes to change the whole place. Because with the way we set the charter up was totally democratic, and if the majority of people decide that Sanibel should look like Miami Beach, then it's going to look like Miami Beach. So it is very important that if you care about this community, the core values it has, the reasons you live here, the extraordinary natural resources we have, and you embrace the mission of the Charter, which is to preserve forever this unique character of this wonderful island that's been so much blessed, then we have to get the message out to the people who come here. What better place than the Historical Museum? Every opportunity you have to see the newcomers, because there are always newcomers, because change happens. So this is it's fun for us to do, but it's also very important, because message making is really how a democracy works, a free, democratic, open society. And I hold up this newspaper because if you really want to know what happened, this newspaper, in those days it was called the Island Reporter, it's different than the current Island Reporter, wrote things like this. This is called The Birth of an Island City. And everything you ever want to know and a lot more is in here about how Sanibel actually got started, who the players were. And if you want to know what happened in 3 or 4 years after the plan came in, then there's another special that the Island Reporter put out, saying, you know, the road to incorporation was long, and so forth. I mean, all of this is chronicled, and it's available somewhere.
And we have copies of the one, Road to Incorporation was a long one. Porter loaned me that paper, and Emily copied it for us, so we will have that here in our archives. Very, very, very interesting. So just know that it is available.
I think the library has all of this scanned, so you can just go online and tell them what date you want, and they'll come up with that paper, and you'll be able to read it right there online.
If you spent half an hour reading this, you would have a pretty good idea. It's got a lot of ads and other stuff in it, but it tells the main...
The ads are fun.
Yeah. The ads are really fun.
Porter, what's the date on that?
I think this was put, it doesn't have a date because it's a special, but I think it was put out in January of '75, maybe. It was right after the incorporation and the city results in the election. But to tell you how old this makes me feel, this little tiny guy right here, last night, I celebrated his 52nd birthday with him. He's our third child. Whoa. Turn it up. Your turn.
Well, we've all had a pack of kids around here. I don't know how many have been here since the early 70s. I think Deb's history goes back a mighty long way. But, it's changed dramatically since I got here. And just the number of people that live here now is just incredible, and the traffic and the other experience. But it's still the best place on earth as far as we're concerned. It's just, all you have to do is go somewhere else and get homesick. So it's pretty fabulous. As far as the history of the city, Porter was in on all of the big doings of getting people to put together our first comprehensive plan. And I was hired as probably a clerk typist or something. I had just been divorced and needed a job, and bada bing, bada boom. It turned out to, well, it was already a passion. My ex-husband and I had worked for a corporation, and we came from places in Florida that had, already gone to hell. So we knew exactly we were on the right path here and had some great pathfinders for us. So the people that were involved, it's still breathtaking. The way things came about and how quickly things came about. It's just, we have so much debt to pay for all the people that worked for them. And I put this guy right here at the head of that list. So the push and the determination was there, and it was there community-wide. I mean, not everybody was on board. My husband now was not on board, but he is now. He's a slow learner, but I am just really, really pleased to be here, and pleased that Sanibel still, for the most part, is on the right track. Just once in a while there'd be a vote that makes me cringe, but I feel pretty comfortable for the moment. Lord knows what the future holds.
Gene, what were some of the organizations on the island at that time that was very helpful to both you and Porter for incorporation?
Well, the primary group was Sanibel Tomorrow, and
That was the election group.
yeah.
I would say the Sanibel Captiva Planning Board.
Yeah.
Malcolm Beatty and that crowd. Bob Haney, Bank, and they were very, very much involved and had been since a couple of years. I would guess 71, so around in there. And the Sanibel Captiva Planning Board, which was a self-appointed group of people on the island, tried to work with the Lee County Commission. Sanibel has never been controlled by the city of Fort Myers. It's always either been Lee County or Sanibel. Well, people say Fort Myers, but it's actually Lee County was the authority out here. And a lot of groundwork had been done trying to convey to the county commissioners in Lee County, there were 5, that Sanibel was a sort of a special place and needed special protections and attentions because of the natural environment out here, and that should be appreciated, and that the zoning should accommodate that, and the growth should not be allowed to get out of control. Those observations fell pretty much on deaf ears in Lee County, because there were a bunch of people in the county who saw it a little differently out here. It felt if we had a Miami Beach, a lot more money would come into the tax coffers in Lee County. So there was a legitimate controversy about private property rights and the public well-being, and who gets to say about things like that. And the long and the short of the story is that the people of the island, one way or another, through going to meetings and talking to each other and having dinner and picking out shows together, doing that kind of stuff, basically came to the conclusion, might not be a bad idea if we did our own destiny. And that led to the question of, well, could we ever incorporate? And then that led to the question of, maybe the county should do everything but the zoning, because we don't want to run the fire department and the human services department and this department and that department. We just want to control growth. And that was sort of the beginning. And it turned out the county commissioners said, no, we're going to do it all. And you guys aren't going to do the zoning. And we had one county commissioner at the time who was sympathetic. He was the county commissioner who represented the islands. And he was generally sympathetic. Walter Shire, I think, did great. Unfortunately, he had a heart attack and was out of action for a while. The other county commissioners were pretty much opposed, I think it's fair to say. One so much so that in one conversation I remember he said, if the people of Sanibel incorporate, we will make sure they get none of the Sanibel Causeway revenues. I think that was the vote, the comment that tipped the vote that made incorporation happy, because everybody out here said, oh yeah, watch. And I think that spirit was very prevalent in our community, because there are two things about this community. People care about nature, but they also care about each other. And they're all sort of independent souls who are great people, have something to contribute, but they also pull together when somebody comes in from the outside and says, no, you got it all wrong, you guys are nuts. No, well, we may be, but we like each other, so we're going to have
Antagonism toward Sanibel, I think, continues today. It's like, even our friends that live in Fort Myers don't understand why we cross that causeway all the time. And they never see the water. I don't understand why we live in this county and not hear about it. The beach and red tide, and the whole 9 yards.
Well, we had to fight for for what we got, and then the question of, is there anybody here who really knows how to incorporate if we decide to do that? So we decided the way to do it was to have a couple of community meetings, and we did over the period of 2 years, I'd say. A lot of intense focus. Everybody come to the community association tonight, and we're going to talk about this. Then it got more organized, and people said, okay, we'll take a vote. Should we try this? Should we try that? So it was a free, democratic, open expression all the way along the line. And of course, there was not unanimity. There were different people. And we set up informal boards that had representatives from all the stakeholding elements of the community to the best of our ability. And we went through a series of votes, and it ended up that we decided, after the community, the majority felt we should pursue incorporation. We had a meeting at the community association. We said, okay, now how do you do that? And we decided, well, you find somebody who knows how to do it. Seemed pretty obvious. So we did, and Z. Butler and a couple of other people, Lou McGall over in Miami, who was a state senator and wanted to be, was involved, and knew people in Tallahassee, knew how to do this stuff. Her name was Eileen Lotz, and she is known as the mother of Sanibel. Eileen was the one who knew how to draw a charter up and get it passed in Tallahassee. And thanks to Gene's ex-husband and a few other people who traveled regularly, Greg was a pilot and flew us up to Tallahassee. We spent a lot of time talking to our representatives up there, who spent a lot of time trying not to listen to us. And it was not an easy road. If you look at it, it says the road to incorporation was a long one. It was intense and it was hard, but it's a miracle. Think of what gets done in a year and a half in any government. I mean, you basically can't get a meeting to see anybody in most governments in a year and a half. So this was amazing, and it was this back and forth with the community expressions every time we'd have a meeting or the county commission would do something. We exchanged the information. We used the newspaper to do that, word of mouth, and it worked very well. So the point that on November 4th, 1974, may have been November 4th. Anyway, 1970.
It was my son's birthday.
Fuck you! It was Matthew's, what birthday?
67.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah, he wasn't.
Mason was only a year, Mason's just a year older. 65% of the people on the island who could vote voted, and the vote passed about 2-1, pretty close, not quite 2-1, as I recall, but it was a very decisive vote. And
And how many people were on the island?
maybe about 1,500 people, but the question was how many were registered voters.
Yes.
And my guess is, I think 1,063 voted.
Right at that.
Is that right?
1,083 is in the paper, and it's 689 voted yes. We had 394 nays.
Yeah, so it was pretty decisive. But the idea was that the pro-incorporation people, nobody wanted to make Sanibel a city, but we didn't want home rule. So we sort of had to be careful how we talked about that, but nobody needed to be excluded. So one of the things I remember right after the vote, we said, okay, look, the people who won this election said we're going to have home rule, now have to embrace the people who are against it and prove that they were right. And so what are we going to do? What are the problems? And the first problem was, does anybody know, well, first we had to elect a council.
Aha!
Just talk about the
Lots
council.
of council members, and I don't know any specifics to share with you about the council election, but it was,
16 people.
I think there were probably that many.
Yeah, there were.
That's a
It's
wonderful
almost
thing.
like-
To
Yeah.
have that many people involved.
Yeah.
Before we go on, how close were we to not getting incorporation because of changes in state law?
Well, I will tell that story if you'd like. There were three main objections to incorporation, not from the people, but from the authorities in Tallahassee. The first one was Sanibel was too small to incorporate, and there would not be a sufficient tax base, there wouldn't be sufficient knowledge to run the place, that kind of thing. So basically they said, hey, you're too poor, you're too stupid, and that got everybody's hackles up again. But the other thing they said was, what's going to happen is if you incorporate, it's going to become a rich man's paradise, and no poor people are going to be there because people are going to get priced off the island right away. And that particular concern is a very legitimate concern. It's the reason we have community housing resources today. And it was a pledge we made that said, no, that's not going to happen. And then that got into promises about pledging to keep the taxes down. That got into promises to keep the city services small, that we are not going to try and be a multi-purpose city to solve all the problems of the world. We're just going to try and take care of the main things, public safety, the police, the planning, which is going to control the growth, and basic administration of City Hall. It was meant, envisaged as a small, professionally run, non-political activity that could basically control the growth on the island. The number one concern in the state authority, once we got over the pledge for the community housing problem, was the size of the city. That simply 1,000 people, 1,500 people, however many there actually were here, registered voters, it wasn't a sufficient base. There had to be 5,000 in the new state plan. This is the number, 5,000. The state planners came up with. But we argued back and forth, and so we weren't going to win the argument. So what we did is that we got the charter bill in one day before they got the new regulation. 24 hours. And it was that close. And of course it was challenged in court. All of this was subsequently challenged in court. I spent a lot of time in court. That's when I used to have hair. But that was the reason. And the other question is, made us do the finances. We looked very closely into the finances and discovered that we really could run the city on 4 mills the first year, and then we could drop the village tax. And we actually did. We were within our budget the first couple of years, kept it very small, and we made it very clear. We wanted an elected council that was not the professional staff, and not professional politicians. We didn't want anybody, just citizens. which is why it was so great. We had 16 people coming from all walks of life to run for the first council, and anybody can run for council anytime. I mean, there's no party path to it or anything else, as far as I know. That's not the way I vote here, so. I feel that the observations that tried to kill us in the state, we were smart enough to stay ahead of them because of Eileen lots, and we were fortunate enough to have knowledgeable people on the island that really took offense at the idea that we were too stupid to govern ourselves. That one did, and that also got a lot of attention and caused people to come out of the woodwork and say, no, I could run a place. And so, you know, there was a lot of that going on. Turned out after incorporation, when we got the first council together, it got a little difficult. And Jean has downplayed her role.
Yes.
She was actually chief of staff, chief executive officer, chief finance officer. She was everything.
Well,
Because there was no other profession. She was it. So I don't, you.
Nothing's changed.
That was the start of a very happy buildup of professional staff, which went through some sort of stutter steps, as anything would, and we changed city managers a few times. And the one thing we did, which was smart, I think very smart, was we had 5 council persons who came from had a completely different purchase on viewing the island, but all of which had the same common denominator. We all agreed on one thing, is that if we're gonna have a good comprehensive plan, we better get the best in the world, because we're gonna get attacked. And sure enough, the private property, public well-being argument is very much out there. We studied Ramapo, New York, we studied Petaluma, California, we studied all kinds of places, other barrier islands, and we hired a firm in Philadelphia that came down and took a look at this place and said, okay, we are environmental planners, we think we know how to do this. They did, and then the smart thing they did was hire an environmental lawyer from Chicago who was absolutely top-notch, who drew up what I think is one of the greatest defenses. To the best of my knowledge, we never lost a lawsuit on land planning in any court, and I may be corrected on that, but I'm not aware of it. We did. So hiring of quality people, and then everybody on the island was invited to come to the planning meetings and tell us.
And they did.
And she knows, because we wrote a thank you note to everybody who showed up. And there was something like 980 thank you notes. I remember Judy worked in and you were jumping on me saying, oh, you can't keep doing it. Need another thank you note. But everybody was on a committee of some kind, and we put the most important issues right up front, and then we said the other things will get you down the road. But I think everybody participated who wanted to. Some went away mad, and some came away happy, but in the end, I think we worked out most of the compromise that we could work out. There was no intent to harm anybody. The whole idea, this seems a little hard in today's politics maybe, was to build everybody in. We really wanted it.
Porter, how long after incorporation did it take for the city to hire its first city manager? And how far after that did the police department and the fire department?
It was a matter of really weeks, more than anything else, because we didn't have the authority to do anything. Only Jean could sign checks. You know, 2 or 3 things happened. I remember a reporter coming out here, I told this story, and Jean can probably tell it better. I was sitting down with a reporter, and literally sitting down with a reporter in Coconut Grove. And he said, okay, I want to write a story. He said, I need a pencil and a paper. And he said, can I borrow your pen? I said, I don't have a pen and paper either. And he said, the city must have. I said, no, the city doesn't. And that was the chicken and egg. That was the beginning. And we went from there really quickly to hiring a police chief, because we knew we needed that under the charter, and we needed a city manager to do that. So I called up the City Managers Association, said I need a city manager. And I wasn't too particular about, you know, whether it was going to be the right one forever. It was, we need somebody who can sign a check today. We didn't have any money. So Gene worked pro bono or on good faith. Did you ever get paid?
A little bit, yeah.
Yes.
Still got pension.
The Bank of the Islands said, okay, we'll help the city out, but we cannot give you a loan because our bank examiners will not allow. So we had to go identity, and actually they came to us and said, look, we can't loan you any money, but we'll help fund a bond issue. And all you have to do is help us subscribe. And so we put out a local IOU bond issue for $500,000 to run the city for the first year. It was oversubscribed in the first 48 hours. And in fact, there were some people who said, I don't want it back. Just keep it.
It
So,
was
I mean,
amazing, absolutely amazing.
the spirit was very intense, and every time somebody off island, usually these suits were filed by developers to, put a monkey wrench into it. And they had a right to do this, don't get me wrong, and they weren't all black-hatted people, they were nice people, they were just looking after their rights. But, that train had left the station, we kept telling them that, look, why don't you join forces with us, because we tend to think you're gonna make a ton of money under our plan on the quality basis, and the fact that this is Sanibel and it has cachet, and if we don't mess it up, you're gonna make a lot of money just by saying Sanibel. And smart people got that. And a lot of them joined in and said, yeah, makes sense, and they've done very, very well. And I will tell you for sure that I'm sure somebody didn't get the property rights they felt they deserved and felt necessary to sue. But by and large, we were on firm ground because we did it openly and fairly. We tried.
And you had the right attorneys.
Yes, I'm an attorney. Well, I said fairly.
And that was a smart firm that hired a good
Right.
attorney.
Was there ever a time when we thought about increasing our geopolitical size by incorporating Captiva?
Yes. It was a huge discussion, and Captiva is felt, they had 53 voters at the time. I think there were 53 registered voters, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was 54. But it wasn't many. And they took the position to say, we don't really want to get mixed up in that big expense that is going to be Sanibel when they incorporate, because they're going to have a police department and this and that, and we don't really need that out here. So there was a little bit of a feeling of, maybe not a good idea for Captiva, but go ahead and do it if you want on Sanibel. There was another problem called beach renourishment. There was a huge beach renourishment problem at the time. It was a very expensive monster just lurking over the edge of the horizon saying, we're going to have to renourish beaches up in Captiva. I think you can verify, no you can't, that to go up the old day. You used to drive on the top of the beach where the telephone poles on the road actually were in the water. There was no beach, that was the road.
I think Captiva Historical Society is doing a talk in about a month that shows pictures of how every winter the road would get eaten away, every winter.
And the road that actually goes to South Seas now is a road that went in after dark. That's the nice way to say that? I don't remember ever seeing that road platted anywhere. It disappeared.
In the 50s, the road just went straight down in front of the monkey dock.
Yeah,
And
I
that
remember.
Yeah,
Growing
so
up.
that just shows you that island was disappearing.
Half that island disappeared and now it came back. And that was expensive. And people in Sanibel said, well, if those people want to pay for the beach, okay. So there was a little bit of that, but there was a tremendous amount of cooperation between the leadership on Captiva and the leadership here. In fact, the Sanibel Captiva Planning Board was made up of people from both Sanibel and Captiva, and we spoke as one, as the Barrier Island of Sanibel Captiva, in front of the county commission. And they were just as concerned with the county commission. Going back to the size question, we did wonder about whether or not having Captiva in would help us out. But when Sanibel incorporated, and we registered with the state of Florida, it turned out we were the second 102 largest city in the state of Florida, and there were 404 cities in the state of Florida. We were exactly in the middle. And even though that meant that the majority of cities in the state of Florida did not comply with the new state law for the required number of citizens, registered voters. So it just goes to show how crazy the whole thing was in those days, and it truly was. There was a lot of mischief going on.
You mentioned something in the beginning of your talk about Lee County insinuating that we would suffer financially for doing this. And it's my understanding that in terms of toll revenue, we're already suffering, that we get about 11 or 12% of it and the county gets the rest. Was that to pay us back or what?
The causeway has been a subject of much amusement, much history, and a lot of money over the years. There are a lot of stories. Gene could probably tell you better ones than I can. What I know about it is this. The causeway is wholly owned by the county of Lee. There did not used to be a pass system on it. I think you paid $3, wasn't it, every time you went over?
Yeah, I think it was.
And then they came up with a sticker that you could put on the side of your car. I think, this is going to sound personal, but I actually think this is what happened. I was up in the Delaware Water Gap one day, and I saw how they were doing the transponders. I said, oh, that's fabulous technology. And at the time, I was a county commissioner. So I took a picture and stuff and got some material and gave it to the county engineer and said, you know, there ought to be a transponder program on the Sanibel Bridge and the other bridges in Lee County. It would make a whole lot of sense, and you would get a whole lot of revenue. What a good idea, let's do this. In the meanwhile, and that did happen, but in the meanwhile, what had happened is the county said, nope, you're not getting any of the revenue. But that was just two of the commissioners. The people who were running the county were very decent, nice, good friends and people. LaVon Wisher was the county administrator at the time. She was a superwoman in my view. She didn't have put any of this politics stuff. She wouldn't stand for it. She said, nope, this is a legitimate city. It's here. We're going to help them out. And she came out here and arranged for the swearing in of the councilman and cut through an awful lot of stuff. So we went to her on a sharing basis and said, LaVon, how about some of the money from the causeway? And they came forward and gave us a percentage. And they said, look, we really want to have an understanding of who uses the traffic. And we started taking surveys of who was driving across the bridge, how many day trippers, which we knew was going to be a nightmare for us sooner or later on Sanibel, because it wasn't always like it is now. And we got to the point where we said, okay, the future of this bridge is to put it into a program with other bridges and bond it and have the approach roads be part of the legitimate expenditure from the toll system. So that would include Captiva, that would include the work, frankly, that's going on at the end of Sanibel right now. The Sanibel road system is an approach road. I mean, everything on Sanibel is an approach road to the bridge. And then the question got to be, how far in Lee County could it be an approach road? Could it be Summerlin all the way? You know, Summerlin wasn't there. Was it McGregor? So this was a court issue. It was a big issue, and it was worked out amicably with the professional people. And then over the years, some bad feelings stepped in. There was a question of repairs, who was going to pay, and the bridge became a leverage for some what I would call local politics again. And in my view, that was a terrible mistake. But that wasn't for me to say at the time. And they got it worked out, and we have a bridge. And we get some of the revenue. And whether we get enough or not, I don't know. I've talked to your councilman about that. I can't talk.
I had no idea what it
I don't know.
At one time too, there was a weight station, wasn't there, on the causeway?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, and then we got revenue, Sanibel got revenue from that, and then that was taken away.
Our first city manager put a weight station out there and said, this is how we're going to get it, the money. And the reason we did that was that the roads on Sanibel, you could tell the roads going onto the island, up the island and so forth were depressed and falling apart. And the roads going the other, and the lanes going the other way were not. The same road, bad lane, good lane. Why does that happen? Heavy trucks. Heavy trucks loaded up with construction stuff going that way, empty trucks coming back this way. Okay. Trucks are different. Why don't we charge them more money? So it was a user fee concept. And that didn't last very long. Oh, we had a lot of ideas that didn't last very long. But that was a good try.
I know when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that after we became a city, there was a time when you had a vote where you still want to be a city. A couple years afterwards, there was.
Yeah. That was, 1980, 78? It was after Z died. Z Butler was our second mayor, I think. I think she was mayor at the time, second, and she resigned. She was ill, we didn't know it. We knew she was ill, but we didn't know she was that ill, and she died, and sadly died. She was a huge force in the election process. Once the plan in the summer of '73 looked like it was going forward, Z was instrumental in bringing people in and making them aware of what was at stake. And she was the one, I think, who put together Sanibel Tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. And there's only a couple of people in here who were around when we were doing this and could correct us, so speak up, Debbie. Z did a fabulous job, but she left unexpectedly, and when she, we had to have an election for her seat, because it was at a part of her term when, I guess she had a 4-year term, and it was a part of her term when there was too much left, and we had to call an election. And so the view was that all those who were unhappy with Sanibel after 4 or 5 years of incorporation, is that right? This is your time. And so a group that came out and said, we are really, I won't say a Chamber of Commerce group, but it was more business oriented. And I remember we had a discussion, community discussion, to view the candidates who were running. I got trotted back out by the original incorporation people as sort of the old fire horse. And the business group put out a very attractive guy named Bob Buckrock, who came down here and he said, look, we've got a lot of businessmen and so forth, but we feel we aren't fairly represented. Let's put Porter out to pasture, he's a nice guy. Buy Porter, and I'll take over. And so it got to be sort of a national attention was, does this little paradise of, crazy nature lovers down off the coast of Florida succeed, or are solid business people going to come in and take over and make things right? It was that kind of thing, and it got national attention. So much so that we had CBS and NBC in your office in Periwinkle Place, literally interviewing us, and the breathtaking, alert news item was too close to call. And, as it just turned out, everybody, as they do on Sanibel, said, no, I think we'll make our opinion known, and it wasn't very close at all. And that meant all the national news immediately lost attention and disappeared, and went back to finding something else to stir up. And we went back to normal and shook hands with Bob Buckrock, and that was sort of the end of that. And I think that was really the last time that we really were challenged on the sort of a business side, that we weren't taking good enough care of business.
Just, who was Walter
Condon, yeah.
Yeah.
We want to build a statue to him. Do you
Wasn't he
remember
kind of a
that?
rabble-rouser?
Let's see, I don't have
You don't have
speech and debate
to say
protection
argument.
here. Walter Condon actually did as much for the incorporation of Sanibel as Commissioner Dick Sayers did. Dick Sayers was the guy who threatened to hold the bridge money. And not only did he threaten to hold it, he put it in everybody's mailbox. They came out to the post office and put a flyer in the mailbox. I thought, this guy is really not very smart. And we all felt that way. And he wasn't, actually, a sad story, actually, the guy did end up in jail. Well, just to give you a dimension, this is another one-off. We had 4 commissioners who ended up either in the stockade or in prison.
Lee County.
Yeah, Lee County. Yeah. As far as I know, Sanibel, we've had some complaints, but no. But Walter was a developer in Naples. He was an attorney representing interests, and he was in Naples mostly, but he was the sword rattler for the developers, for the big developers. And we're talking high-rise, mega group of people. I don't know if anybody here knows what the estuaries ever was planned to be. It was the Troutman development. It was meant to be a city of 15,000 people on the other side of Causeway at Ponderosa, where all those mangroves are, where there is now a development being considered. I can assure you that whatever is being considered, I am against it, because we put that stuff forever in the nature and left it there. Didn't stay that way, of course, and they're now arguing about it. But there was a plan for a city of 15,000 people with high-rises there, called the estuaries, and it was funded by names you would know, national names, very wealthy people and families represented by a lawyer named Bob Troutman. There was that kind of respectable development in this area. That was respectable development, except they were going to rip up the mangroves. And the idea was we didn't want it. And we were saying so, and we didn't want it. We were very clear and open to Walter Cronin and anybody else that if you're planning big high-rises and you want big shopping centers and so forth, go to it, but not on Sanibel. And well, we're invested here. I said, I know, and you're going to make your money back just going with our plan, because our plan is going to be celebrated nationally, which it has been. And people have done well under it. They didn't go away happily, but they went away.
I had always heard that either Fort Myers or you're saying Lee County would refuse to permit anything other than 3 stories on Sanibel. Now, how did that come into being?
Well, it depends who you talk to and what timing, what time in the last 5 decades we're talking about. There was a time when they said, yeah, that would be appropriate on Sanibel to keep the top of the roof line under the tree line. And then that became sort of a goal. And the county commission lived with that for a while, back in the early zoning days before the incorporation talk really got started. That eroded down when somebody came in and said, why? I mean, why shouldn't we go up? That stops sprawl. If we can go up and build a 16-story condominium, then yeah, there's one here, but think of all the land we saved. Well, that's a specious argument, because next door in the land you just saved is another 16-story condominium. And we got onto that game fairly quickly. And then we got to some question when we got into the planning, said, well, actually, how do you treat people fairly who have those kind of parcels? And we looked at it, and so we created a template of what are the decisions that go into the comprehensive land use plan growth. And there are a lot of things like the infrastructure, hurricane protection, public safety, but the environment was a critical part of it. And we decided that part of the environment, which we convinced the court, was that there is a natural aspect of things which has a monetary value, can be monetized, and is desirable, and is not artificial, and is not trivial, and a city should be allowed to do that. So the whole question then of whether or not we had the right to do the dreaded performance standards of anybody who's trying to build anything on Sanibel, measured in, and that came out of the planners and the lawyers. So there were about 6 things you had to check as a property owner to say, how am I going to come out on this? The roads, for example. We said, we're not going to build the Mangrove Highway. This was going to be the elevated road that was going to go from Vanderbilt Beach to Tampa Bay. And it was going to run all the way above all of the barrier islands, all the way up, right up to Tampa Bay to Anna Maria. And it was gonna connect all the barrier islands, a little bit like A1A on the other side. Only this was gonna be a super highway, and it was gonna be elevated, and it was called the Mangrove Highway. We all thought it was a joke, and frankly it was. But there were some people who were serious about it, and they were looking for ways to connect Lover's Key to Fort Myers Beach to Sanibel, all the way up. And if you've ever heard of a guy named Robert Moses in New York, you think, yeah, this could happen. And there was some serious talk about it. The traffic lights. People said, you can't have a community like this without traffic lights. And everybody said, yeah, well, we're going to have no traffic lights. And that almost became to die over. I mean, you lay down in front of bulldozers, no traffic lights. And to this day, we have no traffic lights, which I think is neat. Yes, sir.
What in the Sanibel plan has kept the likes of McDonald's off the island?
They're good cooking for people like Jay.
That's kind of a complicated subject, but land size has something to do with it. But the city's comprehensive land use plan that was adopted in 1976 set forth specific standards of development standards that Porter alluded to a moment ago. So percentage of land that actually could be building, and there was no drive-through allowed, that kind of thing. So it really, parcel size had something to do with it. But in later years, we developed regulations about formula restaurants. So you can't have chain type businesses. Franchise. Yeah. Yeah, no spoil was coined.
Right. What was that, Deb? What was it called?
Mixed spoils.
Okay, mixed spoil.
It's sort of strange that those organizations have decided just leave us alone, it's not worth the fight, because they go across the other side. And start
I think we all say thank heaven, I just was curious.
Yeah.
It's been a fight. Personally, there are a couple of fights I lost. One is, I love casarinas, and we used to have a lot of casarinas on the island, and a lot of them disappeared in a hurricane, and a lot of them were left, but they disappeared later. And that sort of upset me, because I love the casarina, the sound, and the snakes like them, the birds like them, you know, they're nice things. But, and that was to me part of the mission of Old Sanibel. But you don't get what you want all the time, and one of the things that we've tried to do is to compromise in the areas that actually you should compromise for public safety. And so I said, nobody got everything, and nobody got totally nothing. It was tried to be that balance. We tried to talk about, wouldn't it be great if you could dine outside somewhere at a restaurant and see the water? Have a water sign, you know, something. Well, I don't think we can do that because it'll upset the birds, and you know, upsetting the birds is a critical factor of limiting the growth. So we can't be doing this and talking out of both sides of our mouth. So there were some problems like that that, frankly, the next generation is going to continue to deal with. That's fine. Is that fair?
Yes. And you didn't mention the Eagles.
I didn't mention the Eagle for Rent Committee.
Another question. Sanibel today is about 65 to 70% conservation and preservation land, and population of
The land.
the land.
Yes, it
the
is.
land, right?
Yes, it
So
is.
that the 30% that remains is already 90+% fully developed at this point. Is that not true?
That's
Okay,
essentially.
so therefore the population of Sanibel residents now is about less than 7,000 or around 7,000. Is it ever going to get much bigger than that with the Sanibel plan if it doesn't change?
I would say probably it might actually go down a little bit. And I'm not happy to say that, because I think what I'm seeing is perfectly nice homes being bulldozed, and you know, bigger homes.
Tear down.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that that's going to change very much. The question of registered voters is an interesting question as well. That's changing because of the pressures on people to move to Florida with the tax, and, you know, the weather, et cetera, et cetera. We've had a lot of discussion about the things we could control and we couldn't. We knew we could control the market a little bit on below market rate housing. The city had leverage for zoning on that and for bonusing. What we didn't have any leverages on is the First Amendment, right to travel, and right to talk, or right to assemble, or any of the other amendments. And so suddenly, day trippers becomes the #1 problem. And we have looked at, you know, everybody I know has looked at that problem, and there's just no satisfactory answer. We tried parking. I was talking to a Fort Myers attorney that we all knew and loved at the time, and he almost had apoplexy when I told him we were putting in a parking ordinance, no island-wide parking, that you had to go to a parking lot and there'd be a $50 fine. And he went nuts. He said, "I'm going to sue you. You can't do this." And what we had done is we had done a survey from Anna Maria Island all the way to Naples and looked at every community, and every other community had already done it. And said, no island-wide, it's a big stiff fine if you do. So there were a lot of things that, you know, we had to work out, but we never could control day trip, could we?
I don't think, not yet.
We're still working on it.
That's true. There's things that open
Can I ask a question? We all know that a lot of our history and the reason that this museum is so wonderful is in thanks to the Bailey family. But Francis Bailey was one of our first council people, and I'd like to hear Porter and Jean's stories, just a few short stories about Francis, because he was a big part of the city in the beginning.
What kind of a story?
Not his third one.
You want to know the political business side of
Well, what a sweetheart he was. Just, I didn't come here to cry, but
Was he our mayor twice? Does that ring a bell?
Francis was the mayor.
Right.
He once came to me after the first council meeting, and he said, "Well, I voted for you for mayor, but to tell you the truth, I would love to have been the first mayor of Sanibel." And I said to Francis, "You will always be the first and only mayor of Sanibel." And I said that at his funeral, and I meant it, and I say it today. Francis was the mayor.
He was the mayor before we were incorporated.
Way before.
Way. Yeah.
Francis was the soul, the spirit, the generosity. He did everything on this island for people, and he even told me how I should educate my children. That was very welcome because I was a Yankee, and he said, "You got some things to learn." That's right. Francis, I agree with Gene. I mean, I say the first council was actually pretty representative of the island. We had Francis, who was Mr. Community. We had Vernon McKenzie, who was just smart as a whip about how things needed to be, ordinances needed to be written, and resolutions needed to be framed, and all of that kind of stuff from his experience as a PhD in Washington, and knew all that stuff. We had Charlie LaBeouf, who was bona fide, sane environmentalist, as opposed to a couple of the other people who would have been a little more radical, shall we say. I can think of a couple, I won't mention names. But we had a great environmental input from Charlie, who was a bona fide guy, the White House guy, Lighthouse guy. Saw things from that perspective. We had Z, who had seen the political element of the thing and understood where the forces were coming from, political forces. And we had one kid went behind the ears and said, "Okay, make him the mayor, and we'll all manipulate him."
What would make Francis upset? Like, do you remember a time, like, what was he really committed to?
Anything unfair. Anything unfair. Francis and I had a huge fight about Casarina. And he never convinced me about that. I said, Francis, I love them. He said, I feel guilt. He said, we brought them to this island and they ruined the island. I said, no, that's not. But we had a very good exchange time and again on Kessley. He would not tolerate unfairness. And I've told this story many, many times. The Sanibel community, one of the proudest moments I ever had as a council member here. We had not a lot of minority representation in our community, but we had some. Been here forever, a lot longer than I had. And the federal government came in shortly after the city was formed and went to one of the families and said, we're moving you, you're squatting on federal land, you're out of here. Well, that did not go over nicely, and it upset the family very much. They came to the city, we had a meeting, we invited the feds, the whole community showed up. That was the end of the discussion. The feds saw it a little differently after that. I mean, I thought, you know, if Francis Bailey were here to help address that in language these people understood, and the language there is, I'm not sure we would have been able to pull that off. It was really sort of amazing, those kinds of things that he always did. I mean, there was no charity, there was no event that he wasn't standing up for and showing out for. He was just a great guy.
But this museum certainly was a love of his.
Yeah.
Saving little pieces of sand.
Yeah, he absolutely wanted that, and he was said, you know, if we fail at that, then they won't know how to make decisions in the future. And that's what, my basic remark, why I'm so glad you're here, is that, you know, now you know, this was hard, it was hard fought, it's precious, and it's worth keeping. And if you think so, keep the message going.
Well, we saw that, those of us that were here in 2004 when they brought the schoolhouse in, about 6:30 in the morning when they were bringing it in. And Francis and Sam were both here watching, and Debbie were, you know, and they had tears in their eyes. They had tears in, and they just wanted the schoolhouse so badly, and it had been a little bit of a problem, but they finally, you know, had access to it, and they were bringing the schoolhouse to the village, and they were just so committed, and we are just so fortunate because of them that we have our history encapsulated right here. I mean, it really means something. Going back to, I was just curious, the Save Our Sanibel, and when you were really working on getting this passed for incorporating the city and all, you said this particular group was support from nationally known individuals. Who were some of those individuals?
I said that?
Like it's Sanibel tomorrow was Z-Buzzer. And then there was another organization, Save Our Sanibel, and it was support from nationally known individuals. And I didn't know who that might have been.
I have to go back and refer, I'm sure it's in here somewhere. And I'm sure.
Raymond Burke.
I would suggest that is a great project for somebody to. I just don't, I know that there are an awful lot of people who are celebrity in the world of nature and shelter and so forth that have been here, who have taken a great interest, but who was directly, you know, writing checks and
I just
making
wondered at
speeches.
that time who it might have been that way.
No, I don't recall.
It might be in Ellie Garner's book.
Yeah, and that would be a better place to look
Yes.
for.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
This is for Jean. Jean, where were the first city offices?
Where were they? In Perrywinkle Place Shopping Center.
Them on the
For
stairs.
a good time.
Upstairs. There was a time when the demographic profile of age-wise of this community was different. Stairways weren't quite such a problem.
And the home reporter was down below, so.
You can just feed anything you want right down there. Adina?
Yeah, you mentioned this tremendous amount of work to get this passed. I mean, attorneys and going back and forth to Tallahassee and everything. How did you get the funds for that? Did you just all chip in, or how did that work?
My recollection is it was everybody chipped in. I mean, if we had to charter a plane, we got a free pilot for a break, and either a group would pick up the check, and, you know, we'd say this is Sanibel tomorrow or something. It was all completely transparent, because we couldn't afford it for anyone.
Because attorneys are expensive. Did anybody donate their services?
Yeah, almost everything was pro bono. Now, Eileen Lotz, I think, did get paid, but I think she sort of waived the fee for a while so that there was no cash flow problem. And I'm sure what she did representing the city up there, and I just don't remember those numbers, was absolutely insignificant. I mean, I'm sure the costs were covered, and I imagine Z and some of her friends. But when Eileen was here, she stayed with somebody, usually with Z or somebody. So we cut costs as much as we could, because we were trying to advertise this is going to be a frugal operation. This is going to be not more than 4 mills. We're going to save on your county millage. So the taxpayers actually are not going to be paying a whole lot more, because one of the biggest worries was pricing people off the island. And we really had to be convincing about that, and that was some of the groups. We had a lot of charts and so forth. Funnily enough, when the Chamber of Commerce came up with their what it's going to cost to run the city, and they were against the incorporation at that point, at that time, and the people who were for the incorporation, they came up and presented 2 budgets at the Community Association one night, and they were very close to each other. So it almost became a non-issue. I imagine that's in a paper somewhere.
And didn't, I think in the article too, it mentioned that when you finally did meet that night at the community center, decided to go ahead and investigate going on with incorporation of the city, there was $10,000 pledged that night for funds to kind of get things going. I mean, again, it's just everybody contributed because we're going to do this.
Yeah, and it wasn't 1 or 2 wealthy people writing 1 or 2 checks. It was generally across the board. And I know when the bank put out the bonds, we particularly asked that they keep the denomination low and try and sell as many as they could, as opposed, because we wanted everybody to have a piece of the rock, to understand that, you know, you're part of this.
Yeah, ownership.
Well, what was so beautiful is that it truly was like a mission from God for most people in this community. It was the people that were hired, the people on the council, people on the planning commission, everybody was in it, you know, groups in it, 100%. It was just totally fascinating.
I can distinctly remember, and I think you can too, Dan, a Chamber of Commerce meeting in the early 1970s when the discussion was, should we advertise Sanibel in a New York paper or not? I am not kidding. And the vote was no. Nobody except Shellers had heard about Sanibel. It was a Shellers place. You say, oh yeah, my grandmother used to take me there to collect genomics. That was it. And then, of course, the cachet has changed dramatically. And the management of that on island, I think, has been good. We invited the people who planned it 20 years back to look at it and say, give us a scorecard. And Walsh McCart sent somebody back, and I think we got very high marks, if I'm not mistaken, that we've done well.
Wasn't Sanibel one of the first cities in Florida to have a land use plan?
We were, certainly a comprehensive land use plan became a standard, and not just in Florida. I know Dick Workman and myself went to other communities in Georgia and Carolinas and places like that. We became very hot topic very, very quickly, and a lot of people wanted to see us go away, and a lot of people wanted to see how we did it. And so it was a little bit of both. But it was, the Sanibel plan was the opening for a lot of places like Fort Myers Beach, Bonita Beach, Bonita to incorporate. Because there were only 3 cities in Lee County. There were only 2 before Sanibel, and then we were the 3rd. It was Fort Myers and Cape Coral. And it was a very tight community, and the rumors you've heard that CIA was behind all of this are not true. I will tell a story. When I went as the first mayor of Sanibel to meet the other mayors across the water to talk about mayoral things in Naples, Fort Myers, and Cape Coral, and the Sunshine Law prevailed, So there were 4 mayors and there were 4 reporters in the room. 4 mayors were former CIA and 2 of the reporters were former CIA. So if you ever wonder how it really happened,
You have to kill us, right?
There were some journalists that did investigate that kept saying there has to be
there was a national
dirt
security,
on this. Yeah.
Richard Allen, who was the national security advisor for the President Nixon at the time, had a condominium on the island. And he came down here for vacation, and he saw what was going on, and he really thought it was wonderful, and made it very well known that he loved Sanibel the way it was, and great things were going on. Well, a reporter in Washington, for one of the Washington papers, which was the evening paper, it's no longer there, came down and wrote a tongue-in-cheek story, which was headlined, "What does CIA want with Sanibel captivity?" And it started out with a true fact, was that some of the training for the Bay of Pigs was on New Settlement.
Yeah, that's right.
And that all of those people, of course, live on Sanibel. And so there was this tongue-in-cheek story about the guy who ran this newspaper, Don Whitehead, who was a genius getting the paper going, myself, Freddie Boughton, who was the manager. We were former agency people. And so that there was a fact that there was a close relationship with agency people who retired here. And there were others as well. And so they said, what does the agency really want? They started identifying this. Well, Richard Allen read the article and said, oh, this is outrageous. And he wrote this straight letter saying, these are nice people. They're Democrats. We couldn't believe that he had done this. This is our national security advisor who doesn't understand the joke. Not good. Anyway, that is true.
And they, I'm sorry.
Is there no connection then with the Bay of Pigs and CIA and Sanibel? That's a myth?
It is a total myth, but you go with it as you will. No, the reason a lot of CIA people retired down here in Southwest Florida is they're nice people who wanted a nice place to retire. They traveled all over the world saying, okay, this is about as good as it gets. I mean, that's why.
Do we have any other questions? Well, I'll tell you, and I know we all agree, we are so fortunate to have, thank heavens the 2 of you were around in the early 70s to do everything we did to bring to us what we now have. And, you know, it sounds like the spirit of Sanibel, what it was then and what it is now, and with all the people in this room, I know it takes the whole village to keep this place going, and it's just like, if you know, you can call somebody, and I'm sure it happened, you know, back then too, you need something done or whatever, and people usually don't say no. They'll say, I need a help, you know, need a hand, and they're right there. And it sounds like that's what Sanibel started too. Everybody was willing to lend a hand.
We always wondered, would we be able to keep that spirit of community here? And I think the answer, at least in my lifetime, is yes.
Incredibly.
Yeah.
And especially, I think we all witnessed it when those of us that were here right after Charlie, everybody pitching in to help. I think that was just unbelievable. Well, thank you so much.